class. All right. So welcome to people watching at home. We just took a moment to say hello, and we took a moment to dedicate this class, dedicate our practice of being in the depths of these contemplative arts to someone in need of healing. So if you want to do that, anyone watching at home, you can dedicate this learning time to someone in your life who needs healing. And so one of the common threads across all of the contemplative healing arts is a sincere wish for the collective to be well. And so one of the teachers that I followed for some time used to say, as goes the individual, so goes the collective. And there's a depth of understanding for our commonality, our common humanity, and that we share through what Jung called the collective unconscious, the spirit that is within all of us. We share that impetus toward growth and toward the want for healing, for integration. And so there's an understanding that there is a mirror principle at play. And Buddhists were talking about this, psychodynamic practitioners were talking about this way before mirror neurons were discovered most recently in neurobiology. And ancient traditions talked about this, that as the individual shifts perspectives by bringing the unconscious to conscious, doing that insight journeying with a sincere and dedicated heart, then the mirror you are looking in, which is the universe, reflects something different back to you. And so that is one of the common themes that, or principles, shall we say, that upholds psychodynamic or depth-oriented traditions in clinical counseling. So let's look at some of the other common themes, common threads cutting across the depth-oriented perspectives. Okay, so I'm just going to share my screen here and share a little bit. Okay, we're going to go through some of the common threads. And these will be up on the course page, so you don't have to worry about taking notes, although it doesn't hurt to write out, jot out as you're learning. There is research on that you're more likely to retain the information and integrate it fully into your psyche. So no matter who you're reading for your assignment, it's very likely that you'll find, if you're looking at one of the pioneers of these depth-oriented tradition, that in some way, shape, or form, they value the unconscious as a rich storehouse of information. So there is a deep valuing of the unconscious. And since we're teaching primarily from a Jungian and Erickson psychodynamic framework, we look very seriously at the unconscious as a place where there's information, and certainly information that is underneath the radar that's going to be looked at in the counseling relationship. If you're tending toward the more analytical, the information in the unconscious, so for example, Freudian, the information in the unconscious is more data to work with, although there's healing resources as well. And then the emphasis on self-healing with the unconscious as an ally comes more later with Carl Jung and some of the transpersonal teachers. And one thing that's across the board really important, if you're what we're calling a mind-body-spirit practitioner or a depth-oriented practitioner, is your commitment to consciousness raising in the therapist. And this commitment is also often reflected in your clients. That the clients you attract through letting people know that this is the type of work you do. You know, the way you let people know as to what type of work you're doing is the way you're going to get types of people in. So people who are really wanting to bring the unconscious to conscious, really wanting to embody the hero archetype that Carl Jung referred to. Not everybody wants that in psychotherapy. Not everybody wants consciousness raising. But if they're searching out for more of a depth-oriented anchor in their psychotherapeutic journey, then they're going to want that consciousness raising. They're going to want to take more action around, you know, what Schwartz calls self-leadership. That we're no longer carried by the ocean tides of parts and our past. We're not carried out to sea by those things. We're anchored in at the shore because we are in the lead. We are in the lead of our lives walking across the beach. There's going to be a lot of beach metaphors today because I'm so close to one. Empowered self-efficacy over symptom resolution is the primary focus of these traditions in clinical counseling that we've been talking about. So we've been going over techniques that address these internal struggles. Other forms of therapy, for example, more of a behavioral model, would stress relationships with the external and how to challenge what's going on externally, for example, in your relationships. So, for example, a clinical counselor might emphasize social skills training, communication skills. And that's all fine. And a good therapist may, in fact, bring that in at various points in the psychotherapy. And the primary focus is to address the internal trauma-based struggles that fuel one's suffering around the external. That's the difference. We always go back to within. Where are the attachment ruptures? Remember when we talked about the development that occurs across the lifespan? The depth-oriented therapist is always listening with their heart as to, where is an aspect of the psyche still stuck along that developmental continuum? Which developmental task still needs to be addressed? Was the child able to, for example, say no and assert their sense of I am from an early age? Was that okay during that very important developmental time of the beautiful twos? If not, they're going to have to learn it at some point because that developmental task has not been completed. So we cannot continue along the arc of the hero's journey. I'm using the hero's journey as the archetypal wisdom from Carl Jung. They're always going to be listening with their heart for where are the developmental disruptions, where has the attachment trauma taken place with a primary figure, and what has been the result. So is the result showing up as a failure to trust? Is the result showing up as overly defensive? adverse childhood experiences are explored. The past is explored, especially around those wonderful defense mechanisms that we all have and that we've talked about in this class. Do we stay in the past? No. Do we stay future focused? No. We stay presence focused. Embodied presence is the name of the game when you're a depth-oriented therapist. And to be fully present, your past is about wisdom, not informing your present in a way that takes you off track from who you are and who you're meant to be into your future. So we look at both. All right. You can go ahead as I go along, and if any of this is bringing up questions or insights or comments, please put them in the chat or ask a Q&A or raise your hand. I have a feeling I can't see the chat while I'm sharing, but maybe I will, but I'll get to it eventually. So we talked about mindful presence, and the therapist does a lot of their work on this. That, you know, there's, I think this video is in the audiovisual library on this course page. If I better check. And if not, I'll put it up. But there is a wonderful interview I did with Thomas Moore when he was guest faculty for one of our programs. And he talked eloquently about if you decide to be a psychotherapist, you are always one. It's like being an author or being a teacher. You are always one. It's not a job, but your job may relate to who you are. But who you are is you are a therapist, you are a healer. And so your life becomes a lab. And what a blessing and a privilege to have this opportunity. That our lives become this laboratory of self-development. So we call this concept in psychotherapy use of self. It's the most powerful tool you have. You could have all the information in the world, read all the books, have a PhD, and I'm sorry, I've met many. And if you don't have mindful presence, you're going to overrate yourself as a competent therapist. And the research backs that up. That therapists have this tendency. There's research by, it's the Center of Excellence in Psychotherapeutic Research, and I'm blocking on the person's name. But psychotherapists will be asked to self-rate themselves in basic counseling skills, such as empathic presence, which we'll talk about, you know, during, at least for people who are in the full immersion program during the counseling skills lab. And therapists will rate themselves high on empathic presence. And then when they're scored along, you know, an actual outcome indicators of empathic presence, which is mindful presence, they don't score as high as they thought. So we have, unfortunately, a problem in our field of overrating our competence. And so as a depth-oriented therapist, we're super committed to being on this journey for ourselves so that we can utilize our mindful presence when it comes to something that happens in therapy, guaranteed, called transference. And so when our clients transfer their struggles, their anger, their defense mechanisms, their worries, their attachment trauma, onto you. The depth-oriented therapist understands this is gold. This is what's supposed to happen when a psychotherapy relationship is deep enough to allow it to happen, because that's the alchemy right there. When the shit comes into the therapy room and it's being thrown in your face, you say, thank you, because that is a turning point. And so you better have your shit together when it happens. And we have mindful presence so that we can hold that shit in our hands and say, hey, can we look at this? What's coming up here for you? It seems like there's a lot of anger in the room. Am I reading that correctly? It's okay. It's okay for the inner child in therapy to hear a therapist who the inner child is thinking is a parent figure. It's okay to hear that figure, that authority figure, say, it's all right to have anger. Maybe that child has never heard that before. The adult might need to hear it too, especially if the adult has just been hijacked by an inner child who thinks that anger is bad. And so there we open up the doors. There's that part coming up. So the question then, the bridging question from that transference moment might be, where is that anger felt in the body? Would it be okay with you, client, to explore this? What was your messaging about anger when you were a kid? What if that kid was on a chair, an empty chair right across from you? What might they be feeling when you are expressing anger, when they are expressing anger? And you use that glorious moment of transference as probably the richest dialogue on anger that person has ever had in their life. But you'll miss it if you're not able to hold mindful presence when that transference comes up. So we also work as depth-oriented practitioners. We work with counter-transference. When you notice yourself having a reaction to a client, you don't want to see that client. You're getting agitated with the client. You're feeling depressed about that client. Your energy is being drained from the room by that client. Use it. Be mindfully present and ask yourself deeply, what is going on here? Am I picking up something from the client? If I'm feeling suddenly drained, could this be the way the client is feeling? Again, we go back to that concept of the collective unconscious and the universe as a mirror. What is the mirror showing the client? Sometimes clients communicate, this is a transpersonal perspective, they communicate with their energy when their words can't speak it, or when something hasn't come to consciousness. Through the collective unconscious, you'll pick it up through counter-transference. Only through mindful presence will you have the courage to sit with how you're feeling and not make it about you and your ego, but opening your heart to it with love, holding it and exploring it. What's going on here and how can this exploration serve the journey of this client? Sometimes you'll get perspectives on if you're feeling that way, probably not always, but sometimes it means other people in the client's life are feeling that way. And so that might also be your launch point into discussion. And so when, for people who are in the full certification program, when we'll be able to practice, and we might even be able to practice today, but certainly next semester, practice responding empathically and appropriately to transference and countertransference when they show up. But it's all about mindful presence. Obviously, with depth-oriented traditions, we're going after an exploratory process. We're going to have patience, and we're working on building insight. Okay, that's why we do insight journeying throughout SOPHIA. We're building insight in ourselves, building insight in the clients. What happens when the unconscious comes to conscious? We have insight. Does insight mean change? Absolutely not. Does long-term sustainable change happen without insight? Absolutely not. Do you need insight and action? Yes, with mindful presence. That is the three-pronged approach of whatever your healing signature is. All right. Whatever your healing signature is, however you bring your capital S self into the therapy relationship, is your individualized transpersonal factors. Transpersonal, the mind-body-spirit connection. How do you bring it to therapy? How do you individualize your therapy? And how do you respect, honor, and integrate the client's transpersonal factors? What are their mind, body, spirit values? What is their mind, body, spirit path? These are things we want to explore. And it's something that all depth-oriented practitioners will have in common, is to take their lead from the unique way that the conscious and unconscious works with the client, the unique psycho-spiritual traditions of the client and therapist together are looked at, brought to the therapeutic realm. All right, let's go through one more slide, and then if you have, we'll do a bit of a chit chat about all of these. All right. So even though we're depth oriented, we're also looking at cognitive and behavioral factors. So we are drawing on the best of cognitive and behavioral traditions, and that's why we explored cognitive and behavioral pioneers to our entire field, because we want to encourage flexibility in the way people think and act. Like I said, insight isn't enough. There's got to be a change in the way you're thinking and acting. So in your for those of you who are in 444, or you will be soon, we're looking more actively at transforming the thinking, the feeling, and the acting. This is not an overnight process. So it's a long game. The growth journey is a long game. Now, you might have a tendency toward a shorter term approach with clients. I'll tell you, when I was more actively doing therapy, I would sometimes see people every week for maybe 2 months, and then switch to bi-weekly for maybe a month or so. And then maybe I wouldn't see someone for that same person for 6 months. And then maybe I'd see them once a month for 2 months. And then I wouldn't see them for 6 months. And then it'd be, once or twice a week for 3 weeks. And then, 7, 8, 9 years later, it's every now and then. So it may not be weekly or 2 to 3 times a week for a year, but over time, as you do this work, you do see the changes that don't happen overnight, but that are radical with a person who's committed to this change process. Okay, and sometimes you see like pretty quick changes too. Especially around the experiential techniques, which we're going to practice today. So we're definitely not working only from top down, from cognition. We're not using